St. Bonaventure was born around the year 1217 in the small town of Bagnoregio, located in the region of Umbria, Italy. His baptismal name was Giovanni Fidanza. From an early age, he suffered from delicate health, a situation that caused deep concern for his parents, especially his mother, Maria Ritella. Fearing that he would not survive childhood, his family sought the intercession of St. Francis of Assisi, whose fame for holiness was spreading throughout Italy. According to tradition, it was thanks to St. Francis's intercession that Giovanni recovered his health in an extraordinary way. This striking fact became for him a clear sign of predestination and inspired him to devote his entire life to God. Growing up in a deeply Christian home, young Giovanni early on showed a brilliant intelligence and a heart inclined toward piety and study. Still a boy, Giovanni received his initial religious formation from the Franciscans. His family looked favorably on his friendship with the friars minor, whose simple and devout life fascinated him greatly. Observing their example, Giovanni began to nurture the desire to follow the same path, embracing evangelical poverty and love for the crucified Christ. As he grew, his intellectual talent became evident. It was decided then that he should pursue higher studies. For that purpose, Giovanni departed for Paris, which at the time was the greatest intellectual center in Europe. The University of Paris gathered renowned masters and students from various regions, becoming a fertile environment for the maturation of his vocation. In Paris, Giovanni deepened his knowledge of philosophy and theology. His interest in spiritual questions was not mere academic curiosity. He sought truth as a means of reaching God. In that context, he entered the Order of Friars Minor, receiving the name Bonaventure, which means good fortune, alluding to his miraculous healing. Entering the Franciscan order marked a turning point in Bonaventure's life. He uniquely united the contemplative life and theological study with Franciscan humility and simplicity. His example showed that learning was not the enemy of holiness, but could be a powerful instrument for glorifying God. During his novitiate, Bonaventure devoted himself intensely to prayer and meditation. He spent long hours in contemplation, seeking union with Christ, poor and crucified. At the same time, he distinguished himself by his intellectual discipline, reading and commenting on the works of the Church Fathers and Christian philosophers. His love of knowledge fed no vanity. On the contrary, the more he learned, the more he recognized his smallness before God's greatness. This sincere humility, joined to a rare intelligence, caused his brothers to hold him in high esteem. Many sought him for spiritual advice and guidance. Bonaventure became a disciple of Alexander of Hales, one of the greatest theologians of his time, who soon perceived his student's worth. Under his guidance, Bonaventure consolidated the foundations of his theological thought, which would later be known for its deeply spiritual and mystical character. In 1253, Bonaventure received the title of Master of Theology, placing him among the great professors of the University of Paris. He then became official lecturer for the Order of Friars Minor and began to teach with recognized authority, attracting multitudes of students and religious. His manner of teaching differed from that of many contemporaries. While others limited themselves to purely speculative debates, Bonaventure enlightened the intellect without forgetting the heart. His classes combined doctrinal depth with spiritual fervor, inviting everyone to a living experience of God. During those years, he composed several works of great importance, among them the Commentary on the Sentences of Peter Lombard, a synthesis of Christian theology that would become a reference for generations of students. His thought was consolidating as a luminous testimony to the harmony between faith and reason. Despite his academic responsibilities, Bonaventure did not neglect the life of prayer. He used to say that study should always lead to contemplation, for only love of God could give meaning to knowledge. This conviction shone through every page he wrote. His prestige at the university did not go to his head. Always available to his brothers and to the humble, Bonaventure had the gift of consoling the afflicted and reconciling those who lived in discord. That practical charity was the reflection of his deep union with Christ. In Paris, he soon became a reference figure in the Franciscan order. His superiors saw him as a possible leader, capable of guiding the order during a period when it faced internal tensions over how to live poverty and the evangelizing mission. In 1257, at only 40 years of age, Bonaventure was elected Minister General of the Friars Minor. This election was met with joy by many brothers, who saw in him the ideal person to lead the order on the paths of the gospel. He accepted the mission with humility and a spirit of service. His election occurred at a troubled time, for the order faced divisions between more rigorous groups and those seeking adaptations to apostolic life. Bonaventure understood these tensions and set out to work for unity, inspired by St. Francis's example. One of his first decisions was to visit personally various Franciscan communities throughout Europe. He wanted to know firsthand the reality of each fraternity, listen to the brothers, and foster fidelity to the original charism of evangelical poverty. Traveling through France, Italy, Spain, and Germany, Bonaventure proved tireless. Despite fragile health and long journeys, he insisted on meeting each group, celebrating the Eucharist, preaching, and strengthening fraternity. That close presence generated great esteem for his person. For Bonaventure, fidelity to the Franciscan rule consisted not merely in observing external norms, but in cultivating an inner life of love for Christ poor. He repeated to the brothers that the true Franciscan spirit is born of contemplation and is expressed in humility and charity. His firm yet merciful leadership gradually calmed tempers and consolidated the order as a vital spiritual force for the Church. Bonaventure thus became not only a master of theology, but also a shepherd, attentive to his brothers' needs. Alongside administering the order, he continued his writings. It was during this phase that he composed some of his best-known works, such as The Journey of the Mind to God, in which he presented his mystical thought in a clear and profoundly inspiring way. The impact of his teachings extended beyond the Franciscan circle. Many masters, bishops, and even the Pope recognized in Bonaventure one of the great luminaries of medieval Christianity. He became a bridge between intellectual rigor and sincere devotion. His way of living and teaching touched hearts because it showed that holiness is not the privilege of a few, but the vocation of all the baptized. That message would echo for centuries, nourishing generations of Christians seeking union with God. At the end of this first part, we can see how Bonaventure united from early on: study and prayer, charity and wisdom. That fruitful synthesis would be the foundation of his work and his life, earning him the title Seraphic Doctor, which expresses his ardent spirit of divine love. One of St. Bonaventure's most influential works was the Itinerarium Mentis in Deum, known in English as The Journey of the Mind to God. In it, he traces the spiritual path the soul must follow, from contemplating creation to reaching intimate union with the Creator. This work would become a milestone in Christian spirituality and profoundly influence Western mysticism. The starting point of this spiritual journey is contemplation of the created world. Bonaventure taught that all creatures are like footprints of God, visible signs of the Creator's beauty and goodness. By observing nature with eyes of faith, the soul recognizes the reflection of the eternal Word in every being. For him, there is no opposition between reason and faith, science and contemplation. Ordered study, conducted with humility and rectitude of intention, becomes a ladder that lifts the heart to God. This harmonious vision gave him great credibility among his contemporaries and inspired confidence in his disciples. The second stage of the journey is interior recollection. Bonaventure recalls that the human being was created in the image of God, and that by diving sincerely into oneself, one discovers the Creator's presence imprinted in one's own soul. This introspection is not mere psychological exercise, but a loving search for Him who dwells in the depths of the heart. Next, the itinerary leads to contemplation of eternal truths, accessible through supernatural light. Bonaventure emphasized that although reason can achieve much, only grace fully enlightens the mind and moves the heart to love God above all things. For that reason, he insisted on the need for constant prayer as the source of true wisdom. Another fundamental point of his thought was the centrality of Christ. For Bonaventure, Christ is not only the Redeemer, but also the supreme model and the indispensable means of reaching the Father. All creation was made by Him and for Him, and only through Him does man find the fullness of his destiny. This profoundly Christocentric vision appeared in all his works. In the conferences and sermons he preached, Bonaventure repeated that the crucified is the ladder that lifts us, the bridge that reconciles us, and the light that dispels all darkness. Contemplation of the crucified Christ in his poverty and humility was the apex of the spiritual life. Bonaventure also wrote about the need to purify the senses and passions. For him, sin darkens the intelligence and hardens the heart. Without penance and detachment, it is impossible to advance on the path of union with God. Therefore, he exhorted his brothers to live in evangelical simplicity and radical detachment. His mystical theology is permeated by poetic language that reveals his heart inflamed with love. In describing the stages of the spiritual path, Bonaventure uses images of light, fire, fragrance, and music, conveying something of the ineffable beauty of the divine experience. This sensitivity made his texts not only instructive, but deeply moving. At the same time, he never separated mysticism from doctrine. For Bonaventure, the experience of God must always be in harmony with the faith of the Church. This fidelity to the magisterium and tradition ensured the orthodoxy of his writings and the confidence the hierarchy placed in him. Another striking aspect was his vision of creation as a reflection of the Trinity. He believed that all that exists proceeds from the Father, is molded by the Son, and is animated by the Holy Spirit. This Trinitarian vision gave his theology great coherence and a contemplative dimension that touched hearts. Bonaventure also composed devotional works such as the Breviloquium, a concise summary of theology, and the Life of Saint Francis, which would become the official biography of the Saint of Assisi. In that work, he sought to show how Francis's life was a living preaching of the gospel and a model for all Christians. His biography of Saint Francis expresses deep admiration and tenderness. Bonaventure saw in Francis a perfect example of the union between action and contemplation, poverty and joy, humility and spiritual authority. For him, the Franciscan charism was an evangelical renewal destined to illuminate the whole Church. In these writings, Bonaventure shows great balance. On one hand, he recognizes the need for structure and discipline in the Franciscan order. On the other, he keeps alive the flame of the radical ideal of poverty and simplicity. This ability to reconcile opposites made him a respected mediator in times of tension. His love for sacred scripture was well known. In his lessons and sermons, he frequently cited the Gospels and the letters of St. Paul. He said that the Word of God was the soul's most solid food, and that no human science could replace it. Humility was his hallmark. Despite his prestige as a theologian, Bonaventure considered himself only an unworthy servant. He refused honorary titles and sought to maintain Franciscan simplicity even in high offices. This silent witness won still greater respect. His moral authority came from his coherent life. Many contemporaries report that his face radiated peace and kindness. When he preached, the strength of his words came not from rhetorical eloquence, but from the holiness that flowed from his communion with God. Bonaventure also contributed to dialogue between the religious orders and the university. He argued that the mendicant friars had a legitimate place in academic life, provided they did not lose the spirit of poverty and service. That defense helped consolidate the role of Franciscans as teachers and preachers. His friendship with St. Thomas Aquinas is another notable aspect. Although they held different views on some philosophical questions, they nourished great mutual respect. St. Thomas, on learning of Bonaventure's death, is said to have remarked that the Church had lost a light that illuminated the world. Despite so many occupations, Bonaventure found time to assist the poor and visit the sick. His compassionate heart did not lock itself in study. He saw Christ present in those who suffer and believed that no activity was nobler than serving the neediest. In the general chapters of the order, he showed prudence and discernment. He knew how to correct firmly when necessary, but always uniting justice and mercy. The brothers felt in him a spiritual father who knew their weaknesses and could encourage them to fidelity. Besides mystical theology, he also excelled in liturgy. He composed hymns and prayers that exalted divine love and Christ's humility. His liturgical texts would be used for centuries, nourishing community and personal prayer. Bonaventure's influence surpassed his time. He was called the Seraphic Doctor because his doctrine was inflamed with love, like the fire of the seraphim. That burning flame would continue to inspire generations of Christians. His writings were translated into various languages and became manuals of spirituality. Many later saints, such as Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross, drank from his wisdom, finding in it nourishment for their interior journey. Concluding this second part, we can affirm that Bonaventure knew how to unite, like few others, intellectual depth, contemplative mysticism, and active charity. His legacy remains alive in the Church, inviting everyone to make their own journey toward the heart of God. After consolidating the unity and spiritual vigor of the Franciscans, Saint Bonaventure came to be seen as an indispensable figure for the entire Church. His balance, luminous doctrine, and personal witness made him an example of pastor and teacher. For that reason, he began to receive invitations to collaborate on ecclesial matters beyond the limits of his order. During the pontificate of Pope Clement IV, Bonaventure was consulted on doctrinal and disciplinary issues, always presenting responses that reconciled fidelity to tradition with pastoral prudence. Even so, he maintained his Franciscan simplicity, preferring a withdrawn life and silent prayer. One of the Church's great concerns at that time was the relationship between the mendicant friars and the secular clergy. Many tensions arose from the presence of friars in cities and universities. Bonaventure dedicated himself to dialogue, seeking mutual understanding and proposing paths of communion without abandoning Franciscan identity. His prestige only increased But he never let himself be seduced by fame. He retained the same humble spirit he had had in his youth. When he sensed someone was praising him excessively, he shifted the conversation or attributed all merit to God. Among the responsibilities he assumed was participation in Franciscan general chapters, where he drafted guidelines aimed at keeping St. Francis's spirit alive. For him, it was essential that evangelical poverty be not merely appearance, but an inner disposition of total trust in providence. Over the years, Bonaventure consolidated a vision of religious life that united contemplation and mission. He said that friars should be men of deep prayer, but also ready to go out into the world, preaching and serving the poor. This synthesis became an ideal for many religious institutes that would emerge later. In 1273, Pope Gregory VI decided to elevate him to the Cardinalate. The news reached Bonaventure while he was traveling, visiting convents. According to tradition, the papal envoys found him washing dishes in a monastery kitchen. That symbolic detail became famous and revealed his spirit of service. When he received the red hat, Bonaventure accepted the appointment out of obedience and with a deep sense of responsibility. He became Cardinal Bishop of Albano, one of the suburbicarian dioceses of Rome. The humility with which he accepted so great an honor edified all who knew him. As a cardinal, Bonaventure began participating in important decisions about the Church's future. One of the most significant challenges was the Council of Lyon, convened in 1274 by Pope Gregory VI to promote union with the Eastern Church and address ecclesial reforms. Bonaventure was appointed by the Pope as one of the central figures in organizing the council. His intellectual and spiritual prestige made him the most suitable person to moderate delicate discussions and seek consensus. His tireless work contributed decisively to the success of the debates. One of the most sensitive issues addressed at the Council of Lyon was the schism separating the Catholic Church from the Patriarchate of Constantinople. During the sessions, Bonaventure showed great charity and profound respect for the Eastern legates, seeking points of convergence and avoiding unnecessary confrontations. Throughout the sessions, he intervened with serene words that conveyed the authority of one who spoke not only with the mind, but with a heart aflame with love for the Church. Many accounts attest that his speeches profoundly moved the participants. Another important theme discussed at the council was the need for disciplinary reforms, especially in clerical and religious life. Bonaventure argued that the Church's renewal should begin with the example of holiness from its pastors and leaders. For no external norm would be effective without interior conversion. During the council, he continued to celebrate the Eucharist with recollection and simplicity. Even amid such lofty tasks, he did not lose the Franciscan spirit. He himself said that humility was the shortest road to reach God's heart. Pope Gregory VI held Bonaventure in great esteem and frequently sought his counsel. Between them, there was mutual trust and admiration. The Pope saw in the Seraphic doctor a model of what a shepherd of the Church should be, wise, humble, and holy. While the council was still underway, Bonaventure was charged with drafting documents and reports that synthesized the session's conclusions. His clear and profound style ensured that the text would serve as references for all Latin and Eastern clergy. Meanwhile, his health began to cause concern. From a young age, Bonaventure had had a fragile constitution, and with his accumulated responsibilities, his body weakened. Even so, he did not lessen his work pace, driven by love for the Church and his brothers. Shortly before the council's official closing, Bonaventure fell gravely ill. Those around him realized that the end of his earthly pilgrimage was near. Despite his weakness, he maintained the serenity and faith that had always characterized him. Knowing he was about to depart, he asked to be left in recollection. He spent long hours in silent prayer, surrendering his life to the Lord he had always loved. To those who visited him, he exhorted fidelity to the gospel and fraternal charity. Many testified that in his last days, his face seemed transfigured by supernatural peace. God's presence was almost palpable in the room where he rested. It was as if his heart had already crossed the threshold of eternity. St. Thomas Aquinas, who was also attending the council, learned of his illness and wished to visit him. However, before he could arrive, Bonaventure surrendered his soul to the Creator. The Christian world lost one of its greatest luminaries. Bonaventure died on 15th July 1274, at about 57 years of age. His death caused deep emotion among the prelates gathered in Lyon and throughout Christendom. Many considered him a saint from that moment. His body was buried with great veneration in the Franciscan church of Lyon. In the following days, numerous testimonies of favors obtained through his intercession began to circulate, fueling popular devotion. The Church would officially recognize his sanctity some centuries later. In 1482, Pope Sixtus IV canonized him, declaring him a model of virtue and doctor of the universal Church. The title Seraphic Doctor was bestowed on him to express the ardent fervor of Franciscan spirituality. At the close of this third part, we contemplate St. Bonaventure not only as an eminent theologian, but as an tireless pastor, man of prayer, and humble servant. His entire life was a hymn to God's love, manifested in his wisdom and tenderness toward all. After his death, St. Bonaventure's luminous example spread rapidly throughout the Church. His writings were copied and studied with great care, especially by those seeking to unite science and spirituality. Many monks and friars found in his works sure nourishment for contemplative life and strength for apostolic action. Throughout the Middle Ages, the universities continued to use his treatises as indispensable references in theological studies. He was regarded, alongside St. Thomas Aquinas, as one of the pillars of scholasticism. Yet his way of thinking differed by the affectionate and deeply mystical tone that imbued every line. Bonaventure's thought decisively influenced Franciscan theology. His emphasis on the primacy of love over purely speculative knowledge would become a hallmark of the spiritual tradition of St. Francis's sons. In that school, heart and intellect never walk separately. Among the most fruitful ideas of his legacy is the notion that all creation is like a great book in which God has left his traces. This sacramental vision of the world helped generations of Christians to cultivate gratitude and respect for nature, contemplating it as a reflection of divine goodness. Beyond his major works, Bonaventure wrote numerous sermons and shorter treatises. Some, like the Soliloquium, are passionate prayers revealing the saint's inflamed heart. Other more doctrinal texts deal with topics such as the Incarnation, the Eucharist, and the life of virtue. Among his best-known legacies is the Legenda Maya, the official biography of Saint Francis of Assisi. This text became required reading in Franciscan fraternities and exerted decisive influence on spreading the Franciscan ideal throughout medieval Christendom. Bonaventure's influence reached later great mystics as well. Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross, for instance, cited his work with respect and admiration. Popular preachers also found in his writings a source of inspiration for speaking about God's love. In the 16th century, during the Council of Trent, His works were recommended as safe and orthodox nourishment in times of doctrinal contestation and spiritual crisis. His theology proved timely and able to strengthen faith in difficult periods. When Pope Sixtus V officially conferred on him the title of Doctor of the Church in 1588, he recognized in him not only a master of sacred science, but a model of contemplative sanctity. The Church declared that his teachings remain valid and necessary for all times. Over the centuries, Saint Bonaventure became patron of theologians and students, especially those dedicated to Franciscan theology. Even today, many seminaries and colleges bear his name, testifying to the permanence of his influence. In our times, marked by strong rationalism and pragmatism, Saint Bonaventure's message resounds as an invitation to rediscover the primacy of love. He reminds us that knowledge of God is not the fruit only of study, but of a heart purified by humility and inflamed by charity. His vision of the world as a reflection of God also inspires a new ecological sensitivity. In an era when creation suffers so many assaults, his contemplative gaze teaches that respecting nature is ultimately recognizing the Creator's presence in all things. Many scholars consider St. Bonaventure a forerunner of a Christian ecological spirituality. He did not see creation as a mere object of use, but as a sacrament that speaks of God's goodness and beauty. That reverent outlook can inspire more responsible attitudes in our day. Another current aspect of his legacy is his emphasis on fraternity. In a society often marked by competition and individualism, Bonaventure reminds us that only in mutual love does the Church become a living sign of God's presence in the world. His doctrine also helps overcome false dichotomies between prayer and action, contemplation and commitment. For him, the true disciple of Christ is one who unites both aspects. A contemplative heart that becomes active and active hands that remain joined in prayer. In many religious congregations, his writings continue to be read as a source of formation and spiritual renewal. Franciscans in particular keep his teaching alive, transmitting it as a precious heritage to new generations. Saint Bonaventure's liturgical feast is celebrated on 15th of July. On that day, the Church recalls his luminous witness of holiness, wisdom, and humble service. It is an occasion to renew commitment to the values he embodied: evangelical poverty, fraternity, and passionate love for Christ. Several prayers composed by him remain in use today. His liturgical hymns, full of sweetness and fervor, touch the hearts of the faithful and awaken the desire for union with God. That spiritual musicality is another trait that makes him so special. Pope Benedict XVI dedicated a catechesis to Saint Bonaventure, emphasizing that he knew how to reconcile intelligence and piety, study and prayer. The pontiff declared that his theology is a theology of the heart, illuminated by prayer and love. That praise sums up well Bonaventure's figure, a man who transformed science into praise and made wisdom a song of love to the Creator. His life shows that true greatness lies in recognizing one's own smallness before God. Throughout history, many churches and religious communities have taken his name in honor and gratitude. His examples of humility and charity have become inspiration for all who seek to live the faith authentically. In the field of ecumenical dialogue, his figure also offers bridges. His attempt to bring East and West closer during the Council of Lyon shows that it is possible to dialogue without renouncing truth. That lesson remains valuable in a world much in need of reconciliation. His spirituality, profoundly centered on the crucified Christ, reminds us that every renewal of the Church is born from a personal encounter with Jesus. Without that first love, any reform becomes sterile and superficial. Contemplating his life and work, we can affirm that Saint Bonaventure is one of the great voices calling Christians to unite reason and heart, knowledge and humility. He teaches us that true theology is not merely theory, but living experience of God. Concluding this fourth part and the entire narrative, the invitation remains to return to his writings in a spirit of prayer. Saint Bonaventure remains today and always a master and intercessor, showing that only love is worthy of faith and only humility reveals the face of the true God.